Live from the Export Beer Garden Studios, welcome to another episode of the BYC, where we have much to cover off, but fear not, all is in hand, particularly given the transformation of Sports Journalist of the Year, Dylan Cleaver. Gone are the daggy track pants and heavily stained t-shirts, replaced instead by four-piece suits, highly buffed shoes and even a monocle. Today we'll be razor-focused on the New Zealand side, picked to take on the Aussies. We'll peel back the layers of the Bbl Draft and stick the boot into Suki Bubba, Davey Dum Dum, as well as touch on the resurrection of Bazball. And let's kick it off, Dylan Cleaver, just you and I today, but Paul will be flitting in and out, I think is the way to say it.
Guest appearance.
Yeah, guest appearances with the New Zealand squad for the Hadlee Chappell one-day series. I'll go through it and then we can discuss. Williamson, Allen, Bolt, Bracewell, Conway, Ferguson, Guptill, Henry, Latham, Mitchell, Neesham, Phillips, Santner, Sears and Southey. Your thoughts, Dylan?
Yeah, I guess the feature of the squad is Finn Allen, been retained after the one-day series in the West Indies, obviously ahead of Will Young, which is probably not a surprise after Will Young kind of missed his opportunity in Ireland, but maybe a little bit of surprise ahead of the experienced Henry Nicholls.
Yes.
Who, if you remember, was kind of thrust into that opening role in one day as not of his own accord and did a good job of it. So they obviously feel that Finn Allen is the talent of the future. I guess another feature for me is Ben Sears. I'm less convinced about this pick. I think it might be just give the boy a bit of a holiday to Australia, see how it's done.
Yeah, well, but also, I mean, if you're going to select quicks, Australia's a place to do it, isn't it? Because we have had success with quicks over there.
Shane Bond.
Bondy,
Yeah.
I recall in the absolute carnage that he inflicted upon Steve Waugh. For me, the squad is pretty predictable, but I've been pondering this New Zealand squad for a little while now,
okay.
and I want to ask you a genuine question here, Dylan Cleaver.
Yes.
Where is the squad at? Because clearly we've got players getting towards the end of their careers. Your Guppies, your Southies, your Bolties, your de Grandhommes, but we're not really in a transitional period, are we? But do we need now to start looking to bring in some new blood into the side? Because it feels like we're kind of not in a rut, but stuck a little bit at the moment, particularly with the Test game.
Betwixt and between almost.
Yes, yeah.
It's a little like, this is a cricket podcast, so we won't labour what's going on with rugby at the moment, but it's almost a similar scenario where we're trying to rebuild on the fly without actually rebuilding.
Yeah.
One-day cricket's a bit tricky because you just don't play enough of it these days to really get a feel for where the squad's at. But look, I did mention the caps alongside these names, and on the surface it is actually quite a nice mixture of guys that have played a lot of cricket. Kane Williamson, 152, Guptill, 196, Latham, 111, and obviously Southey, 146, with some fresh faces. Sears, who hasn't played one. Phillips, who's played 5. Daryl Mitchell, he seems like he's been around for a while now. But
yeah, it does.
He's actually only played 7 ODIs. Conway's only played 6 ODIs. Finn Allen, 7. So it feels like this might be the changing of the guard without actually the guard having gone out.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned Finn Allen because I really had my questions about him. Yeah. Obviously, that innings of 96, I think it was, against the Windies showed, on a difficult, tricky pitch, showed that he does have the ability to adapt. How do you think someone like him will go on the Australian wickets? A little bit bouncier, a little bit quicker, because he's got remarkably quick hands. I've got a little inkling that he may be a surprise over there. He may surprise all of us.
Yeah, and look, I don't know how Kazali Stadium in Cairns plays. I haven't got a Scooby-Doo, so I'm just going to presume it's a Queensland wicket and it's got a bit of bounce and it's got a bit of pace. And this will test some of these guys out. It will test Finn Allen out. I tell you who's batted pretty well in Australia in the past is Guptill.
Yes.
I think he likes the pace and bounce. Latham and Williamson haven't been good in Australia.
Well, that's going to be one of the key questions because we were talking about Williamson in the last podcast.
Yeah.
And I believe that the New Zealand public and New Zealand Black Caps fans are sort of reaching a point with Williamson, we were asking the question, what's going on with Williamson in terms, we know he's got this injury, and I think you made a really relevant point in the last podcast, which was maybe that physical injury is beginning to manifest mentally for him, and it's beginning to sort of stop his play, because let's be honest, in the past, Williamson actually has been quite sensational. There was that series where the Australians couldn't get him out over in Australia for
the Test series,
Test series, where they literally couldn't get him out.
Yeah, he's
got to show some form.
He's never done quite so well in the one days there. I mean, he hasn't played a hell of a lot of one day cricket over there. I've noted down here keys to success, and for me, it is those experienced guys standing up. It is your Guptills, Williamsons, Lathams. That's where I think you're going to see the bulk of the runs, although I have a sneaking suspicion, if the conditions are as we expect it, that Devon Conway will quite enjoy a bit of pace and bounce on the ball too.
Well, he's another player, actually, interestingly enough, that is under a little bit of pressure. And he obviously had a sensational start to his career, and he's, teams are beginning to work him out a little bit more, so I think he's got a lot to prove.
I'm maybe a little bit more worried on the other side of the ball, actually. Bolt's been very good against Australia, maybe not quite as good in Australia, but Southey averages 62 with the ball in one-day cricket in Australia, and his economy rate, you can get away with that if your economy rate's 3.8, but his is closer to 6. So we need your Southeys, we need your Williamsons to be pretty good to win.
Yeah, and we also need Lockie Ferguson to stay fit, don't we?
To stay fit,
because I really do believe that the quickies over there are going to be a weapon. And, I was watching the Australia-Zimbabwe, the first one day the other day. And, that Australian side is absolutely chock full of talented all-rounders, isn't it? And power hitters, your Marshes, your Greens. So it's going to be a challenge over there.
And now it's the perfect time to bring in the David Warner incident.
Oh, yes.
Look, this makes me laugh. The guy did the right thing, basically. He was given not out, caught behind. Zimbabwe reviewed. Warner knew he'd nicked it, so toddled off.
Yes.
But waited obligatory to the wait for the thing to come on the big screen. The snicko didn't pick up the nick, but you could actually hear that it's weird.
Yeah. It was a weird situation, and I think the fact that Warner walked really told the story there, and in my book, he should have carried on. Which
is why I want to throw it over to you as the umpire. You've seen Warner do that.
Yes.
You've probably thought, oh, yeah, I did get that wrong. He's admitted it, he's off. And then you're getting word in your ear from the television going, mate,
there's no indication that actually he did hit the ball.
Yeah, there seems to be a noise there, but it's not registering on snicko. I'm going to have to ask you to stay with your decision. Would you, as an umpire, have gone, oh, look, mate, I might just actually change my decision?
Oh, I probably would, but I would have got a slap around the chops for it, I imagine, because, if you got the third umpire coming back to you and saying there's nothing that actually suggests. And in Warner's defence, and it's a very flimsy Trump-like defence, sometimes you're not sure if you hit it or not. And so maybe there was an element of that in it. And he was like, and the keeper, who's also the captain of Zimbabwe, was adamant, as was the bowler.
Yeah. But I think he nicked it.
Oh, yeah, I think he did too. I think
it was an equipment snafu.
Maybe there was, an element in his mind, well, actually, maybe I didn't nick it. Maybe I thought I did, but actually I didn't.
So our final judgment on Warner in this incident, good guy or bad guy?
Oh, dickhead. No question, man. I mean, we're never going to think he's a good guy, Dylan.
Never changed, Jason.
Yeah. Now, let's look at the BBL draft controversy. Colin de Grandhomme. Now, let's get into that first and foremost. That was a surprise. He himself wasn't expected to be drafted. Then Bumfer, he is, I think it was by Adelaide.
Yes.
And Gillespie, I believe, is the coach of Adelaide.
Yeah.
And so Colin de Grandhomme wasn't expecting, a pleasant surprise for him. But then that developed a conundrum with New Zealand cricket.
It did, and although he says he wasn't expecting it, he obviously still made himself available for it.
Indeed.
Without informing anyone.
Yeah.
That he made him. So he's been a little bit of a naughty boy, Colin. But it seems so, if someone like a bit scurrilous had done it, you would have thought, oh, cheapers.
Well, just explain that to me. So the New Zealand players, there's 20 under contract.
Yep.
So is the situation then that if they want to put themselves forward for the BBL, they need, for example, to get permission from New Zealand Cricket?
Yeah, they used to be called non-objection certificates. I'm not sure, which is what they get for the IPL.
Yes.
Basically, if you're in a central contract, they say we will not stop you playing in the IPL. But the BBL coincides with the Super Smash, which New Zealand Cricket just released the schedule for Super Smash this year. The understanding is if you're a contracted player,
you play here.
You play the Super Smash.
Yeah.
So Colin's obviously made himself available without telling anyone, not expecting to get picked up. But lo and behold, he does, and he's got this awkward situation which has just been resolved as we've gone to air.
Yeah, breaking news, New Zealand. What's the breaking news, Dylan?
Colin de Grandhomme calls time on international career. He's announced his retirement from international cricket. He's 36 years old, and he's made the decision to bring down the curtain on an impressive international career after discussions this week with New Zealand Cricket, which has agreed to release him from his central contract. So obviously he's going to play the T20 circuit.
Yeah. And, good luck to him, I suppose, in that regard. It's a big loss for New Zealand Cricket. I'm a big fan of Colin de Grandhomme. But I imagine, mate, with these leagues going on, he's got another 4 years in him, maybe three, to make a bit of moolah.
Yep, he says he's not getting any younger. He has to, training's getting harder. He's got a growing family, and he's trying to understand what his future looks like in a post-cricket world.
Yeah.
And all of this has been on his mind over the past few weeks. I imagine it came forefront to mind when Trent Boult news hit as well, and he thought, well, shit, Bolty's 31 or whatever he is. I'm 36.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a sad reality, but yeah, I mean, the draft in itself was quite interesting.
Yeah, well, just on that, platinum players such as Afghanistan player Rashid Khan and New Zealand paceman Trent Boult were offered $340,000 contracts to participate in this summer's BBL, despite only being available for 2/3 of the tournament. And Steve Smith, the man we all love so much on this podcast, says, seeing some of the players who are coming up for big cash, I know a few of the local players that are big players are a little bit disappointed in terms of remuneration for the tournament.
Yeah, I can see where he's coming from there, but at the same time, the tournament has not been going well.
No.
So they feel like they needed this influx, and it was actually quite embarrassing. A number of those platinum players that there was great fanfare around weren't picked up by any teams.
Yes.
Because of that availability issue.
Well, because there was an element of, we were talking about, are they platinum players, these 12? It's like, really?
Yeah, there's that. And also they were going to bugger off to UAE or wherever it was 2/3 of the way through. So they couldn't play the finals. And, it's just a bit of a struggle at the moment, the Big Bash League. Channel 7 effectively went to Cricket Australia and said, we need to get these platinum players in because you promised us a product. It was nowhere near as good as you promised us, so we don't want to pay all our
fees.
Broadcasting rights
fees.
So there's a real, tug of war between broadcaster and administrator over there, and it doesn't really bode well for the Big Bash League, whereas New Zealand Cricket have quite cunningly just made the Super Smash about the lowest key of the of the domestic T20 leagues.
So anything sort of is perceived as a bonus, really, or as a good thing. Yeah, well, because we mentioned in that last podcast, didn't we, the fact that the crowd numbers for the BBL is really dropping off. It was sort of 30,000. Now we're down to 5,000 to 7,000. I mean, that's a significant drop.
Yeah, and they could handle that if they were still getting massive television audiences. But obviously, that's become a bit of a struggle too.
Yeah. Now, listen, the Empire strikes back. The Bazball is resurrected. Of course, the South Africans giving the English an absolute spanking in that first test, and the English returning the favour, Dylan.
Almost exactly returning the favour. Like in the first test, England lost by an innings and were out in the hundreds both times. Here, South Africa got 151. Dean Elgar wins the toss and bats, which was a brave move. Something similar to what he did at Hadlee Oval.
Yes.
This time he left with a bit of egg on his face. So they got 151. England replied with 415 for 9, with Stokes getting 103 and Folkes getting 113.
I tell you what, Stokes has always been a player that everyone values, but he just seems to have grown an arm and a leg. Particularly, he seems, to me, actually, with his bowling, really to be coming into his strengths. Yep. He's really making a difference in that front.
Yeah, he is, and he's just a larger-than-life force
Yes.
on the field. You can see these are really magnetic character. Like even if Ollie Robinson takes a wicket, everyone sort of runs to Stokes first. First
well,
and foremost.
in many respects, I mean, he's the perfect character to sort of encapsulate Bazball, as it's been dubbed. You know what I mean? He's that kind of abrasive and get stuck in, play aggressive, attacking cricket. He's your perfect sort of leader.
Yeah, and I mean, the only problem I've got with these two tests, Folks batted and kept brilliantly as well. He's a hell of a cricketer. Is there been 2 bad games of cricket?
Yeah.
But thankfully, we've got a decider. There's a week off, but the decider is at the Oval, which is usually a good cricket wicket, and that's next week.
Beautiful. I've been enjoying that immensely. Waiting! Now, obviously, we don't have Paul Ford here, but he tuned in earlier in the day, and let's cross to him now for the ever-popular News or Ruse.
Yes, boys, it's Paul Ford here. It's News or Ruse. Good afternoon from sunny Tauranga today. I'm actually gallivanting around the country for News or Ruse this week. Just a reminder, there's 3 bits of cricket news, and there'll be something funky with one of them. You lads got to tell me which story and what's the error. If neither of you get it, I get some points. Currently, Dylan Cleaver is reigning supreme. He's on 8. Paul Stuart Ford is sitting in the pocket, as he likes to do, with 3. And Jason Hoyte is battling away, mired in the depths of a Ken Rutherford in the West Indies-esque slump. 0 not out. Good luck, Jace. Anyway, this week, number 1. Alveston Cricket Club's 4th 11 have claimed an unwanted footnote in cricket history after they scored just 9 runs in a Derbyshire League defeat to Risley Cricket Club's 2nd 11. To make matters worse, 7 of Alveston's runs came from extras, 5 leg byes and 2 wides, with opener Will Hobbs the only bloke that got on the board who scored 2 runs. 9 of his teammates were out for a duck, and Blake Hall was not out but failed to score a run. According to this match scorecard, Alveston held on for 10 overs despite their low scoring in the Division 8 South fixture. Taking the field for the reply and an inevitable defeat, Alveston kept it tight in the first over, with Hobbs only allowing just 1 run. But in the next, Nick Buckthorpe whacked 2 boundaries and they got over the line at Risley Cricket Club, which is halfway between Derby and Nottingham. Lovely part of the country, actually. Number 2, former Australian Test captain and what would you call him? Dick pick exponent. Tim Payne is back training with Tasmania's first-class squad and eyeing a comeback in the state's grade competition, which begins in October. He's been out of the game since November when he relinquished the Australian captaincy after a magnificent sexting scandal. The 37-year-old's been back training for 2 weeks, and Tasmanian coach Michael Vaughan, who also coaches the Hobart Hurricanes, confirmed he could yet be considered for the final vacant spot on the Big Bash franchises list. He's 2 weeks back into his training schedule, Vaughan said. He's good physically, he's good emotionally. When it emerged that Payne was back in training, Pat Cummins, who succeeded him as the Australian Test captain, said he hoped a return to cricket was in Payne's future. Someone like Payney, as a mate, you want to make sure he's okay, Cummins said. We all make mistakes. He did the wrong thing, but he tried to fix the situation as best he could. Really, Pat, not sure about that. Number 3, Wellington social cricket teams pushed winter training sessions to extreme lengths for a great cause. The North City Taniwha bowled and batted more than 11,000 balls in the nets over 24 hours in the weekend to raise nearly 10 grand for the children's charity, the Swan Nest. We're exhausted. I don't know how many balls I faced, but I can't hold a cricket bat at the moment, batsman wicketkeeper Jamie Collier said. The last 5 hours of the massive session were the longest hours of our lives, he said. The charity provides therapy, support and advocacy for children and families living with complex health conditions. The money raised by the team will secure kids' music therapy sessions for another 6 months and help plans to add an arts therapist. No word on whether there will be a cricket coach added in there, but hopefully that could come too. There we go, boys. 3 stories. You tell me what's wrong with one of them.
Who's to go first this time?
I'm pretty sure it's mine.
Yes.
I'm just going to go story 1.
Oh.
I'm going to say there 2 players scored runs.
Oh, that's what I was going to do. Okay. You mean 2 players, only 8 ducks?
Correct.
Yeah. We can't really have the same answer, so I'm going to have to go.
Well, you can't because you need to catch up.
3 and say the figure of 11,000 balls wasn't correct.
Good call.
Good tries, boys. The answer this week is number 2. The Tasmanian cricket coach is definitely not Michael Vaughan. It's a bloke called Jeff Vaughan. Unrelated.
Strange, I heard that name
number
and thought,
2, and you didn't mention something to do with it. The man named Vaughan. You didn't get any points. So let me know how you got on.
Damn it.
Well done, Paul Ford.
Yeah.
Actually, strangely enough, I heard Michael Vaughan's name and I thought, shit, is he coaching Tasmania these days?
That's what I thought too, because he does all the commentary over there. So I thought, probably makes sense. Now, it's also time for Paul Ford's Cricket Violence Corner.
Paul Ford's Cricket Violence Corner.
Yes, it is. Police are hunting a man who reportedly attacked a seagull with a cricket bat in a Dorset seaside town. The man allegedly swung at the bird on Marine Parade in Lyme Regis at 4 p.m. on Sunday the 17th. The animal suffered a broken wing and had to be put down, the Dorset police said. Busy day at the Dorset police station. The attack took place near Poco Pizza, great spot, while the beachfront was busy with visitors, including many children, the police said. The suspect was described as white, aged in his 50s and about 5 foot 10 inches tall. He is said to have spoken with a South African accent and was wearing a Jim Beam branded T-shirt and a grey hat. I did have a think about potential South African bogans that could be. I don't know what they think about seabirds, but my nominations are Grant Elliott and Fani de Villiers.
Yeah, or Pat Simcox, perhaps.
Yes. Hey, now listen.
Hey, I once attacked a seagull with my hockey stick, and I feel I was fully justified.
Yeah, they're bloody...
The seagull was dive bombing and attacking me. It got really close to my head. It was by the Cenotaph in New Plymouth, if all my Taranaki listeners are with us here, St Albans Street. It was bloody frightening, and I took a big swing at it. I missed, thank God. I would have felt terrible.
Yeah.
But sometimes you've just got to do it.
Scavengers of the sea, aren't they?
Grody
birds. Now, let's get into a little bit of correspondence here. Muzz asked a question about the whole drafting and Colin de Grandhomme and Trenty's move. We've kind of addressed that, I feel, a little bit, but he does have a question for you, Dylan, does Muzz?
Yeah.
I understand your love of the Cantabs, Dylan. Name your 4 favourite Cantab players.
Well, Muzz, there won't be 4. I can promise you that. Shane Bond.
Yes.
And because he's a national treasure and no other reason, Sir RJH.
Yes. It's got to be Flem as well, surely.
No.
What? No. Stephen Fleming. Outrageous.
No. I preferred his the Wellington version of Stephen Fleming than the Canterbury version.
Right, okay.
The Cantabs were a bit difficult during that period.
Jeff?
No, my other one, it's got to be, and I don't know a lot about this guy, but you've got to look him up in the records. This guy played 19 years of first-class cricket for Canterbury. He didn't bowl. He was only captain for a few of them, so he wasn't like your specialist captain. He scored 1 century and averaged 19 in first-class cricket. His name was Cranwell Bull. Just a fascinating character in the history of cricket, because there seems to be no logical reason why someone can hang on for 19 years with that sort of record. But perhaps, I don't know, maybe he was a scion of Canterbury cricket. Maybe he was, one of these guys that was seen as a leader on the field, even if he wasn't necessarily captain. But I'd love to know more about him.
Maybe he just had connections to the hierarchy, mate, to the top blokes.
Yeah, that's my 3.
Yeah. Okay, nice. Now, before I get into fish and chips from Whitby, notes from the pockets of Tony Blaine's Blizzard Wash jeans, we were going to have a new segment from you, Dylan. Cleaver's new segment, Obscure Cricketers of the 90s.
Yeah.
But Blaney, the bastard, he's kind of stolen your thunder a bit this time round, so maybe we'll start that next week.
Yeah, we're going to have to start next week. Blaney's rocked right up and given his own obscure cricketers of the 90s he loved, but I promise I will be here next week with my new segment, Obscure Cricketers of the 90s, and it's a cracker from the South Island. He played the odd game of first-class cricket, but he's actually written one of the great cricket essays ever committed to a Word document, so I'll be focusing on him next week.
Beautiful. Well, here we are. Re some of the more colourful characters in the game during the 90s, there were some rippers that adorned the Central District setup at that time, and although often they didn't stay for more than a game or two, their contributions were memorable, although not always statistically significant. I can't remember his name, but an opening batsman from Hawke's Bay played one game at Fitzherbert Park against Wellington in the early 90s. After putting up a big score, Wellington had us following on, with our debutant bagging a pair on the same day. He proceeded to spend the rest of the match getting shit-faced at various venues around Palmy North and never played again, at any level. Another one-hit wonder was a lad called Joe Baker. He was a promising youngster who bowled fastish leggies. He was an interesting-looking youth with Coke bottle spectacles clinging to a spotty ginger head. He'd been fast-tracked into the CD side halfway through the season after dismissing Martin Crowe in some match with a fizzing delivery. With Crowe's assurance to the selectors that this kid was the goods, he was given a green cap with a stag's head upon it. He took 1 for 100 and plenty at the Basin in his only outing, while Bert Vance totted up a massive century. In terms of intriguing characters from outside CD, not many could match the fascinating contradiction that was Auckland's Peter Neutzer. A more than useful finger spinning legger, Neutzer came from a well-heeled family. His dad was a top surgeon and was to qualify later as a lawyer. It was, however, his voracious off-field appetites that contributed to his legendary status. For example, he was billeted at a Braben Age group tournament and after dropping his suitcase off with the family housing him for the week, didn't return until the tournament was over. In the meantime, he'd been on the lash around Dunedin every night, dossing down wherever and with whomever circumstance provided. The last I heard of him was in the early 2000s, when he was having a bit of bother maintaining his legal certification, given that during some of his recent appearances in court, he'd been a little under the weather, so to speak. Great bloke, though, but he made Chris Pringle look like a Gregorian monk. The 90s was the last decade of the amateur first-class cricketer in New Zealand. Since the game's gone pro, you just don't see any organically produced cricketers thrown into top-grade cricket minus any significant support or coaching anymore. That makes for more rounded cricketers, but also eradicates the opportunities for those who dwell on the fringe of behavioural normalcy, and that's cricket's loss.
I'm going to colour in a few of the gaps here.
Yes.
I'll fill in a few of the gaps. The batsman that Blaney is referring to is a guy called Richie McLeod, who I think might have been playing for Wairarapa at the time. And I know this because I opened the batting with him in a CD trial match.
Yes.
Actually, and he gave the ball a thump, a good front foot player. He did play, he's dead right, he got a pair on debut, and I think it was on the same day, but he did play the next game against Auckland, got 10 and 14, and then disappeared. He was replaced in that CD team by Craig Ingham, never played for CD again, but somehow, and I'm imagining it was because the match was kind of local, he played for a New Zealand emerging players against Sri Lanka later that year, which was classed as a first-class game, and he got a 70-odd. And as I understand it, he ended up becoming a beloved one-club man in England. I think he pissed off to England and played for the club. So he was actually a decent cricketer, but he was enjoying his brief foray into the first-class game by the sound of it.
Yes.
Joe Baker was, in fact, Paul Baker, and he was a Taranaki leg spinner, and he was actually a bit of a sad story. He was a good leg spinner and was sent over to Australia in New Zealand Cricket's wisdom to train with a guy called Peter Philpott, who was known as a leg spin doctor kind of coach.
Yes.
And he went over as a good leg spinner. He came back as a guy who could not bowl a leggy. All he could bowl was this big looping wrong-in that he couldn't land on the wicket.
Oh, no.
So he was completely destroyed. But it is true that he got murdered in the one first-class game he played, and Bert Vance did get a big century. As for Peter Neutzer, that's pretty much dead set right. His dad, John, was a cardiothoracic surgeon, one of the pioneers of surgery in New Zealand. And Peter did run into some problems with his law career, and one of the reasons given was his poor, shambling performance. and core. That is on the record, so we're in no danger of defamation.
Yeah.
I don't know what's become of him.
But the truth of the matter is we love characters like that.
Absolutely.
Though. You know what I
love
mean?
them.
They've got something a little bit different about them. Hey, what's going on in the bounce at the moment, Dylan?
There's plenty going on. The bounce is still All Blacks. We had a great little guest writer yesterday, Brian Finn, writing about the stadium shambles in New Zealand. So get to Dylan Cleaver, all one word, .substack.com and sign up.
Great stuff, mate. Hey, now remember this November, the Dulux Tradies 11 versus the ACC 11 famous cricket match is back. Get your chance to play in the ACC cricket team this year with Jeremy Wells as captain. I'm a bit filthy about that.
Yeah,
I've got real captain qualities. But anyway, we really need all the help we can get. The ACC will set you and are made up with flights and accommodation. Plus, you'll be playing under lights at Tauranga's Bay Oval on November 4th. How good. Don't miss out on an epic two-day event, all thanks to the great New Zealanders at Dulux. Text Dulux to 3236 to enter to win. And just a reminder, those Hadlee Chapel games are September 6th, 8th and 11th, all at Ken's Kazali Stadium starting at 4:20 p.m. New Zealand time, so not that far away, Dylan.
No, looking forward to them and looking forward to the England-South Africa decided next week as well. Plenty of cricket coming up.
Yeah, great stuff. Hey, thanks for taking the time to listen to the podcast. I think the full crew will be back on next week and we'll see you then.